In the heart of Chicago's underworld, Ryan Castellano built an empire on secrets and shadows. But when a quiet bookkeeper named Elena uncovers financial genius hidden in plain sight, she reveals a truth about his organization that no one dared speak, a truth so devastating it could either destroy the mob or save it. What she confirmed changed everything Ryan believed about loyalty, power, and the cost of silence. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The rain drummed against the windows of the Castellano Industrial Holdings building on West Monroe Street, each droplet catching the amber glow of Chicago's streetlights before sliding down the glass like tears. Inside the fifth-floor office, Ryan Castellano sat behind a mahogany desk that had witnessed 3 generations of family business, legitimate and otherwise. The leather chair creaked as he leaned back, his dark eyes scanning the financial reports spread before him like a battlefield map. At 42, Ryan wore authority the way other men wore cologne, invisibly but unmistakably. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly across broad shoulders, and his salt and pepper hair was combed back in the style his father had taught him meant respect in their world. The office smelled of old wood, expensive cigars, and the faint metallic tang of tension that never quite left. Awards and civic commendations lined one wall: Mayor's Business Excellence Award, Chamber of Commerce recognition, philanthropic certificates. The other wall held what mattered more: family photographs spanning decades, each face a reminder of the weight Ryan carried. His grandfather standing outside the original warehouse in 1952. His father shaking hands with a union boss in 1978. Ryan himself, younger and hungrier, cutting the ribbon on their first legitimate shipping contract in 2005. Outside his door, the empire hummed. 48 employees worked in this building alone. Accountants, logistics coordinators, administrative staff, all maintaining the intricate machinery that kept Castellano Holdings profitable and, crucially, legal, at least on paper. The trucks that rolled through their warehouses on the south side carried legitimate cargo 90% of the time. The restaurants they owned served real customers real food. The construction projects they bid on actually got built. But threaded through it all, invisible to auditors and federal agents, ran the real business: protection, influence, and the careful redistribution of money that needed washing. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from his underboss, Marco. Meeting at 10. Salvatore's crew. Issue with the Bridgeport territory. He grimaced. Salvatore Grimaldi had been pushing boundaries for months, testing Ryan's patience and, more dangerously, his control. The old rules were fracturing. The younger generation wanted flashier operations, digital currencies, risks that made Ryan's carefully constructed systems vulnerable. His father used to say the mob survived by being invisible, by blending legitimate business with necessary darkness so seamlessly that even God couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Thunder rumbled over Lake Michigan, and Ryan stood, walking to the window. Below, taxis navigated rain-slicked streets, their lights reflecting in puddles like scattered jewels. Chicago in November was all gray skies and cold wind, the kind of weather that made people keep their heads down and minds on their own business. Good weather for men like Ryan. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said without turning. The door opened and footsteps approached. Light, hesitant. Ryan turned to see Elena Torres, one of the junior accountants he'd hired 8 months ago. She was 26, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and brown eyes that seemed too large for her delicate face. She wore a simple gray blazer over a white blouse, minimal jewelry, no wedding ring. Ryan barely remembered hiring her. Marco had vetted her background. Northwestern graduate, no family connections to law enforcement or rival organizations, references that checked out. She was quiet, competent, forgettable, exactly what they needed in an employee. "Mr. Castellano," Elena said, her voice steady despite the nervousness in her posture. She held a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something in the quarterly reports you need to see." Ryan's expression didn't change, but internally he cataloged details. Her accent carried a faint melody of Spanish vowels, probably second generation. Her hands gripped the folder too tightly. White knuckles, bitten nails, smart enough to be scared, which meant smart enough to have found something real. "What kind of something?" he asked, his tone neutral. Elena glanced toward the door, then stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Discrepancies in the North Side warehouse accounts. Someone's been skimming, but they've been covering it up through the construction subsidiary ledgers. It's sophisticated. They're using legitimate expense categories to hide transfers. If the IRS audits us, they'll find it immediately. The rain intensified, filling the silence that stretched between them. Ryan gestured to the chair across from his desk. Elena sat, placing the folder down, but keeping her hands folded in her lap. She met his eyes, and Ryan saw something unexpected there. Not fear of him, but fear for him, for the organization, as if she cared about its survival. Interesting. How much? Ryan asked. Over the past 18 months? Approximately $1.3 million. Ryan's jaw tightened. That was more than skimming. That was theft on a scale that demanded response. In his world, stealing from the family wasn't just bad business. It was existential threat. If word got out that someone had stolen over $1 million and lived, every soldier, every associate, every corner dealer would think they could do the same. Who? The word came out cold, flat. Elena hesitated. I don't know yet, but the pattern suggests someone with access to both warehouse operations and construction contracts. Someone who understands accounting well enough to exploit the gaps between our systems. What gaps? Here, Elena's nervousness shifted into something else, a quiet confidence that transformed her face. Our financial systems are running on 3 different software platforms that don't communicate properly. The warehouse uses QuickBooks Pro, the construction arm uses Sage, and the main holding company uses SAP. When transactions cross between them, there's a manual reconciliation process. That's where the vulnerability exists. Someone's been creating phantom expenses in construction that match legitimate warehouse costs, then pocketing the difference. Ryan studied her carefully. The explanation was precise, technical, delivered with the ease of someone who didn't just understand accounting, but thought in its language. Most of his accountants were competent at recording transactions, following established procedures. This woman was describing systemic architecture, seeing patterns across platforms. And you found this how? He asked. I was running variance reports for the quarterly review, Elena said. I noticed that material costs for the Pilsen renovation project were running 15% higher than comparable jobs we'd completed. When I drilled down into the line items, I found purchase orders that referenced warehouse inventory that had already been logged as sold to other clients. The same materials were being counted twice, once as warehouse revenue, once as construction expense. Ryan leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. You're telling me someone's been double-booking inventory? More complex than that. They're creating legitimate purchase orders in the construction system, matching them to real warehouse transactions, but then manipulating the cost figures. The warehouse records show the correct prices. The construction records show inflated prices. The difference gets paid out to a shell vendor, which then transfers the money to... She paused, choosing her words carefully. To somewhere else. Where? I haven't traced it that far yet, but I can. The statement hung in the air like a promise. Ryan saw ambition flicker in Elena's eyes, quickly suppressed. She wanted to impress him, or maybe she wanted to prove something to herself. Either way, she'd just handed him information that could lead to violence and bloodshed, and she seemed to understand the weight of that. This folder, Ryan said, tapping the manila envelope. What's in it? Documentation. The discrepancies I found. The pattern analysis, the shell vendor information, everything you need to verify what I'm telling you. Ryan pulled the folder toward him, opening it to reveal pages of spreadsheets, highlighted transactions, and handwritten notes in precise small script. He scanned the first page. The numbers aligned with Elena's explanation. If she was right, and his instinct said she was, someone in his organization had been stealing for 1.5 years. Someone he trusted enough to give access to both legitimate and illegitimate operations. The list of suspects was short and deeply troubling. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp as a gunshot, and the office lights flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, Ryan made a decision that would alter the trajectory of everything he'd built. Elena, he said quietly, from this moment forward, you report directly to me. No one else sees these findings. No one else knows you're investigating. Understood? She nodded, her face pale but determined. Good. I want you to trace that money, find out where it goes, who controls it, and how long this has been happening. You'll have access to everything, all accounts, all records, all systems, but you don't discuss this with anyone. Not coworkers, not friends, not family. This information stays between you and me. Yes, sir. One more thing. Ryan's voice dropped lower, carrying the edge that made soldiers nervous and enemies careful. When you find who did this, bring the evidence to me. Don't confront them. Don't warn them. Don't give them any indication you know. Because once we confirm the truth, there's only one way this ends. Elena swallowed hard, understanding perfectly. She'd grown up in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, where everyone knew someone connected to someone in the life. She knew what happened to thieves who stole from the mob. I understand, Mr. Castellano. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned back. Sir, for what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong. Ryan watched her go, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a bell tolling. He looked down at the folder, at the neat columns of numbers that spelled betrayal, and felt the familiar weight of leadership settle heavier on his shoulders. In his grandfather's time, problems like this were simpler. A soldier stole, you killed him. Clean. Final. But Ryan had spent 20 years building something more sophisticated, more sustainable. He'd turned his father's street crew into a multi-million-dollar organization that operated in boardrooms and city council meetings as much as in back alleys, and now someone was threatening to destroy it from within. The rain continued its relentless drumming, washing the city clean while secrets festered in the spaces between ledgers and lies. Ryan picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found Marco's number. His finger hovered over the call button, then stopped. Not yet. First, he needed to know the full truth. And Elena Torres, quiet, competent, forgettable Elena Torres, had just become the most important person in his organization. She just didn't know it yet. The night stretched ahead, full of questions that demanded answers and consequences that couldn't be avoided. Ryan poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter on his sidebar, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like captured fire. He raised the glass to the photographs on the wall, to the ghosts of his father and grandfather, and made a silent vow. Whoever was stealing from the Castellano family would pay, not just with money, but with everything. That was the rule. That had always been the rule. The thunder rolled away toward the south, leaving only the rain's steady rhythm. And in that rhythm, Ryan heard something that sounded almost like inevitability, the approaching footsteps of a truth that would change everything, confirmed by a woman whose genius had been hiding in plain sight all along. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin. Tomorrow, Elena would start dismantling the careful lies that someone had spent 18 months constructing. Tomorrow, the empire would start eating itself from within, one transaction at a time, until the rot was exposed and excised. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his office, Ryan Castellano allowed himself one moment of something approaching fear, because he already knew, with the intuition that came from decades in the life, exactly whose name Elena would eventually uncover. And that truth would be the one that silenced everything. Elena Torres arrived at the Castellano Holdings office at 6:15 the following morning, 45 minutes before the official workday began. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving Chicago wrapped in a heavy fog that turned streetlights into soft halos and made the city feel abandoned, liminal. She carried a thermos of coffee and the weight of a secret that pressed against her chest like a physical thing. The 5th floor was empty, silent except for the hum of computers left on overnight and the distant whir of the HVAC system. Elena made her way to her cubicle, a gray-walled space barely large enough for her desk, computer, and a single filing cabinet, and set down her bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she logged into her computer. Not from fear, exactly. From the electric anticipation of finally being allowed to use the full capacity of her mind. For 8 months, Elena had worked beneath her capabilities, deliberately hiding the extent of her financial acumen. Her Northwestern degree in applied mathematics hadn't been the whole story. She'd completed her coursework in 3 years, graduating summa cum laude, and had been recruited by 3 major consulting firms before even finishing her thesis on predictive modeling and financial systems. But those offers had come with a problem. They'd all required background checks that would have exposed her family's history. Her father, Miguel Torres, had been a bookkeeper for the Latin Kings in the 90s, managing drug money through a network of small businesses across Pilsen and Little Village. He'd been good at it. Too good. When the feds finally built their RICO case, Miguel had been offered a deal: testify or spend 20 years in federal prison. He'd chosen his family over the organization, entered witness protection, and died of a heart attack when Elena was 14. stress and cigarettes finishing what betrayal had started. Elena had inherited his gift with numbers, and his understanding that in Chicago, the legitimate and criminal economies were threads in the same fabric, impossible to fully separate. She'd also inherited his caution. No consulting firm, no Wall Street bank, no corporate accounting department would hire her once they saw her father's history. The background checks would reveal everything, but Ryan Castellano hadn't run a deep background check. He'd done the basics. Criminal record, clean. Credit history, good. References, carefully cultivated from professors who didn't know her family name, and hired her as a junior accountant at $48,000 a year. Barely enough to cover her studio apartment in Logan Square and her mother's nursing care, but enough. And now, she had access to everything. Elena opened her email to find a message from Ryan, sent at 11:43 the previous night. New credentials attached. Full system access effective immediately. Report findings directly to me, RC. She downloaded the credential file, her heart rate accelerating. This was it. The moment she'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day she'd taken this job. She'd noticed the discrepancies within her first month, had spent the subsequent 7 months carefully documenting them, waiting for the right moment to speak up. Now, Ryan Castellano had handed her the keys to his kingdom and asked her to find the thief within. Elena took a long drink of coffee and opened the SAP interface. The Castellano organization's financial architecture unfolded before her like a three-dimensional map of money flow. Revenue streams from 17 different entities, shipping companies, restaurants, construction firms, property management, all feeding into the main holding company. Expenses flowing out through payroll, materials, overhead, contractor payments, and threaded through it all, subtle as smoke, the discrepancies she'd identified. For the next 3 hours, Elena worked in a state of deep focus that felt almost meditative. She pulled transaction records, cross-referenced vendor payments, traced money as it moved through accounts and corporations. The pattern became clearer with each layer she peeled back. The shell vendor, listed in the construction records as Midwest Materials Supply, LLC, had been created 18 months ago, right around the time Ryan had promoted someone to oversee both warehouse operations and construction contracting. The vendor had a legitimate-looking website, a registered Illinois business address, even a tax ID number that checked out in the state database. But the business address was a mail drop in Schaumburg, and the website's domain registration was protected through a privacy service. Elena dug deeper. The payments to Midwest Materials Supply came twice monthly, always for amounts just under $10,000. Small enough to avoid automatic flagging, large enough to add up. She tracked the money through Midwest's bank account, which she accessed through the routing information on cleared checks. The account was with a small regional bank in Naperville, opened with a cash deposit, and maintained at a low enough balance to avoid scrutiny. From Midwest Materials Supply, the money moved again, wire transfers to an account at a credit union in Oak Park, and from there, it vanished into the kind of complex web that suggested cryptocurrency conversion or international transfers. But Elena found something else, something more immediately useful. The Midwest Materials Supply account had been opened by someone who'd had to provide identification and sign incorporation papers. The Illinois Secretary of State's business database listed an incorporator, Thomas Marchetti. Elena's stomach dropped. Tommy Marchetti was Ryan's cousin, his mother's sister's son. He'd grown up in the organization, working his way from street collections to warehouse management. 3 years ago, Ryan had promoted him to operations director, giving him oversight of both the shipping business and the construction subsidiary. Tommy was 38, married with 2 kids, lived in a modest house in Elmwood Park. Everyone liked Tommy. He was competent, loyal, careful. Exactly the kind of steady hand Ryan relied on to keep the organization running smoothly. And he'd been stealing over $1 million. Elena sat back in her chair, the implications cascading through her mind. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal at the family level. In Ryan's world, there were crimes you could negotiate, mistakes you could survive, but stealing from your own blood? That was unforgivable. She needed more proof, something absolute. Elena spent the next hour accessing security footage archives from the warehouse. The system was older, grainy footage stored on a local server, but it was indexed by date and time. She pulled up recordings from dates that matched large Midwest Materials Supply payments. At 7:47 a.m. on August 14th, she watched Tommy Marchetti enter the warehouse office alone, spend 11 minutes at the computer, and leave. At 4:23 p.m. on September 9th, the same pattern. October 17th, November 3rd. Each time, Tommy entering when no one else was present, using the computer, leaving, creating the phantom transactions, moving the money. Elena created a folder on her desktop labeled Vendor Analysis Q3 and began compiling everything. Transaction records, incorporation documents, bank records, security footage. She organized it chronologically, building a narrative that was clear and irrefutable. By the time her coworkers began arriving at 8:30, Elena had assembled a case that would hold up in court. Not that this would ever see a courtroom. "Morning, Elena," called Jennifer from the neighboring cubicle. "You're here early," Elena smiled, minimizing her screens. "Quarterly reports. You know how it is. Don't I ever? Hey, are you coming to Marco's birthday thing on Friday? They're doing it at Giordano's. Should be fun." "Maybe," Elena said noncommittally. "I'll see how the workload looks." Jennifer moved on, chattering with another coworker about weekend plans. The normal office sounds filled the floor. Phones ringing, printers humming, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. Elena felt disconnected from it all, as if she were watching through glass. These people had no idea what she'd just uncovered. No idea that in a few hours, she'd hand Ryan Castellano evidence that would likely end in someone's death. At 10:15, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Office now, RC." Elena saved her files to an encrypted flash drive, locked her computer, and walked to Ryan's office. Her legs felt distant, her heart too loud in her ears. She knocked twice. "Come in." Ryan sat behind his desk, wearing a navy suit and burgundy tie, looking like any other legitimate businessman. But his eyes tracked her with an intensity that reminded Elena exactly what he was beneath the veneer. "Shut the door," he said. Elena complied, then sat in the same chair she'd occupied the previous evening. She placed the flash drive on the desk between them. "That was fast," Ryan observed. "The pattern was clear once I had full access," Elena said. "I followed the money from the construction accounts through the shell vendor and traced it back to the person who created the company." "Who?" Elena met his eyes, forcing herself not to look away. "Tommy Marchetti, your cousin. He incorporated Midwest Materials Supply 18 months ago, right after you promoted him to operations director. He's been using his access to both systems to create the phantom expenses. The money goes through the shell company's account, then gets transferred to a credit union in Oak Park before moving offshore. I have documentation, bank records, and security footage of him accessing the warehouse computer at times that match the fraudulent transactions." Ryan's expression didn't change. He reached for the flash drive, inserted it into his computer, and spent several minutes reviewing the files Elena had compiled. The office was absolutely silent, except for the click of his mouse and the distant sounds of the office beyond the door. Finally, Ryan removed the flash drive and held it in his palm as if weighing it. "How much, total?" he asked. 1.34 million over 18 months. The amounts have been increasing. He started careful, under 5,000 per transaction. In the last 6 months, he's been taking more, growing confident. "Or desperate," Ryan said quietly. "Sir, desperate people make mistakes. Tommy's been with me for 20 years. If he needed money, he could have asked. The fact that he chose to steal instead means something pushed him to it, something he couldn't tell me about." Elena hadn't considered that possibility. In her mind, theft was simple: greed, opportunity, rationalization. But Ryan was thinking in different terms: family dynamics, hidden pressures, the psychology of betrayal. "What do you want me to do?" Elena asked. Ryan stood, walking to the window. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the Chicago skyline in shades of gray and steel. "Keep investigating. Find out where the money goes after Oak Park. I need to know if Tommy's working alone or if there are others involved. And I need to know why." "You're not going to confront him?" "Not yet." Ryan turned back to her, and his face carried a sadness that seemed ancient, inherited. "In my world, once you accuse someone of betrayal, there's no walking it back. If I confront Tommy now, one of two things happens. Either he runs or he lies. Both outcomes are bad. I need the complete picture first. When I finally face him with this, I need to know everything so he can't wriggle out with half-truths." Elena understood. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the fracture in trust, the wound in the family structure that held the organization together. "I'll find the rest," she promised. "I know you will." Ryan returned to his desk, his expression shifting back to business. I'm also going to need you to identify the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed this to happen. When Tommy's gone, I can't have someone else exploiting the same gaps. Gone, Elena repeated softly. This is who we are, Ryan said, his voice carrying no apology. You knew that when you brought me this information. If you're uncomfortable with the consequences, tell me now, and I'll find someone else to finish the investigation. Elena thought about her father, about the choice he'd made between loyalty and survival, about the years in witness protection, the constant fear, the heart attack at 52 that left her mother widowed and broken. Miguel Torres had chosen to betray the Latin kings, and it had killed him slowly. Tommy Marchetti had chosen to betray the Castellanos, and it would kill him quickly. Different choices, same ending. I'll finish the investigation, Elena said. Good. From now on, you're on special assignment. Tell your coworkers you're working on a project directly for me. They won't ask questions. You'll need access to Tommy's personal files, his emails, his phone records if possible. I'll arrange it. Mr. Castellano, Ryan, he interrupted. If we're going to be working closely on this, you can call me Ryan. The intimacy of the permission felt dangerous, like stepping across a line she hadn't known existed. Ryan, she corrected. What if Tommy's not alone? What if this goes higher? Then we'll deal with that when we know for certain. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. But Elena, keep your findings to yourself. Don't trust anyone else in this building. Not Marco, not the other accountants, not the warehouse staff. Until we know the full extent of this, everyone's a potential suspect. Elena stood, nodded, and left the office. Walking back to her cubicle, she felt the weight of secrets pressing down harder. She was now complicit in whatever came next, bound to Ryan Castellano by shared knowledge and the unspoken contract of his world. By lunch, Elena had accessed Tommy's email account using the administrative credentials Ryan provided. She spent the afternoon reading through messages, looking for anything that explained the theft. What she found was mundane. Work communications, family photos, jokes traded with other employees. Tommy Marchetti looked like exactly what he appeared to be, a regular guy with a steady job, trying to provide for his family, except he was stealing $1 million. At 4:30, as the office began emptying for the day, Elena found it, an email thread from 14 months ago, archived in a folder Tommy had labeled Personal Medical. The messages were between Tommy and Northwestern Memorial Hospital's billing department, discussing payment plans for extensive cancer treatment. His wife, Maria, had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The bills were staggering. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments not covered by insurance, over $1 million in medical expenses. Elena leaned back, a sick feeling spreading through her stomach. Tommy hadn't been stealing out of greed. He'd been trying to save his wife's life. He'd been desperate, exactly as Ryan had suspected. And when the organization's health insurance had maxed out its lifetime coverage, when the bills kept coming and the treatments kept failing, Tommy had done the only thing he could think of. He'd stolen from family. The tragedy of it was almost unbearable. Elena closed the email, her hands shaking. She'd spent the day building a case that would end in Tommy's death, and now she understood that he was drowning, grasping for anything that might keep his family afloat. The mathematics of it were brutal. One life for another, his wife's survival purchased with his betrayal, and now both of them would pay the price. She had to tell Ryan, but what difference would it make? The organization ran on rules that predated both of them. Sympathy didn't change the calculus of betrayal. Elena gathered her things and left the building, stepping out into the November evening. The temperature had dropped, and her breath misted in the air. She walked toward the L station, her mind racing. For the first time since finding the discrepancies, Elena wondered if she'd made a mistake by bringing this to Ryan's attention. If she'd just stayed quiet, kept her head down, let the theft continue, Tommy's wife might have lived. The organization would have survived the loss. Everyone would have been fine. But that wasn't how things worked. Secrets had a way of surfacing. If she hadn't found the discrepancies, someone else would have. And when the truth came out, everyone who'd known and stayed silent would be complicit. Elena had learned that lesson from her father's story. In this world, there was no neutrality. You were either inside the system or working against it, but you couldn't pretend not to see. She'd seen, and now she had to follow through. Tomorrow she'd tell Ryan about the medical bills. She'd give him the complete picture as he'd requested. And then she'd watch as one man's desperate attempt to save his wife resulted in his own destruction. The train arrived, and Elena stepped aboard, finding a seat next to a window streaked with condensation. Outside, Chicago rolled past, shops closing for the evening, people hurrying home, the city's endless life continuing in oblivion of the small tragedies unfolding in offices and hospitals, and quiet conversations where fates were decided. Elena closed her eyes and saw numbers. 1.3 million stolen, 1 life saved, 1 life about to end. The mathematics of morality had no clean answers, just equations that balanced suffering against survival, loyalty against love. And somewhere in the middle, a truth waited to be confirmed, a truth that would silence everyone. 3 weeks after Elena delivered her initial findings, Ryan Castellano sat in a booth at Salvatore's, a North Side restaurant that served as neutral ground for mob business. The red leather seats were cracked with age, the air thick with garlic and old cigarette smoke that no amount of city ordinances could fully eliminate. It was 8:30 on a Wednesday evening, and the restaurant had been cleared of civilian customers. Just Ryan, Marco, and 6 soldiers scattered at nearby tables. They were waiting for Salvatore Grimaldi. Marco sat across from Ryan, his bulk barely fitting in the booth, fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the table. At 55, Marco had been with the Castellano family since Ryan's father ran things, and his loyalty was absolute. But even Marco could sense that something had shifted in recent weeks. "You seem distracted," Marco observed, his voice low. "Something I should know about?" Ryan considered how much to share. Marco was his underboss, his right hand, the man who'd helped him transition the organization from street-level operations to the sophisticated machine it had become. But Ryan had learned that information was power, and power needed to be carefully distributed. "Family business," Ryan said simply. "I'll fill you in when there's something concrete." Marco accepted this with a nod, though his eyes remained skeptical. The restaurant door opened, bringing a gust of cold November wind, and Salvatore Grimaldi. At 40, Salvatore was younger than Ryan by 2 years, but carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never lost a significant fight. He wore a black leather jacket over a designer shirt, his dark hair slicked back, diamond stud glinting in his left ear. 3 men followed him, his crew, all young, all dangerous. Ryan stood, extending his hand. "Salvatore, thanks for coming." They shook, Salvatore's grip slightly too firm, held slightly too long. A test, always a test with him. "Ryan," Salvatore said, sliding into the booth opposite Ryan while his men took positions near the bar. "When the boss calls, you show up. That's how it works, right?" The edge in his voice was unmistakable. For months, Salvatore had been pushing for a bigger cut of the Bridgeport territory, arguing that his crew did more street work than Ryan's people. He'd been consolidating power among the younger soldiers, positioning himself as the voice of a new generation that felt constrained by Ryan's careful methods. "That's exactly how it works," Ryan agreed, "which is why I wanted to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention." Salvatore leaned back, arms spread across the booth's backrest. "Concerns. That's a polite word. Your crew has been collecting from businesses outside your assigned territory," Ryan said, keeping his voice level. 3 restaurants in Pilsen, 2 auto shops in Brighton Park. All of them are already paying into the organization through established channels. When your guys show up demanding additional payments, it creates confusion. Worse, it creates resentment. "Those establishments were being underserved," Salvatore countered. "Your collectors come by once a month, barely even check in. My guys provide real security, physical presence, immediate response. That's worth more than what they're paying." Marco stirred beside Ryan, but Ryan held up a hand, keeping the situation calm. "The issue isn't the quality of service," Ryan explained. "The issue is coordination. When businesses get approached by multiple crews, they start thinking we're disorganized. And when they think we're disorganized, they start wondering if they need to pay at all. It undermines the entire system." "Maybe the system needs updating," Salvatore said. "No disrespect, Ryan, but we're running a 21st century operation with 1980s rules. The world's changed, the money's changed. We should be getting into crypto, into tech sector investments, into exposure," Ryan interrupted. "Everything you're describing creates digital footprints, records that can be subpoenaed. The reason our system works is because it's built on relationships and cash flows that are extremely difficult to trace. The moment we start moving into cryptocurrency and tech investments, We're competing with people who understand those systems better than we do, and we're creating evidence that federal prosecutors love, so we just keep running protection rackets and laundering money through construction projects. Salvatore's tone was mocking. There's real money out there, Ryan. Millions in online gambling, digital fraud, ransomware. The Russians are making fortunes. The Russians are also getting arrested at impressive rates, Ryan said sharply. And when they do, they flip fast because they don't have the family structure we do. I'm not interested in making a fortune tomorrow if it means federal prison the day after. The tension in the booth crystallized into something sharp and unmistakable. Salvatore's jaw worked, his eyes calculating. Around them, both crews watched carefully, hands near weapons, reading the body language of their bosses. You're afraid, Salvatore said finally. You're so focused on not losing what you have that you can't see the opportunities right in front of you. I'm careful, Ryan corrected. There's a difference. My father taught me that survival in this life comes from being invisible. The moment you get flashy, the moment you start chasing easy money, you attract attention. And attention kills. Your father's been dead for 8 years, Ryan. Maybe it's time to stop running the organization like he's still looking over your shoulder. The disrespect landed like a physical blow. Marco tensed, half rising from his seat. Ryan's own anger flared hot and immediate, but he forced it down, keeping his expression neutral. Showing emotion now would be weakness. This meeting's over, Ryan said quietly. You'll keep your crew in your assigned territory. Any business you want to develop, you run it through Marco first. We coordinate, we communicate, we maintain order. That's not negotiable. Salvatore stood, buttoning his leather jacket with deliberate slowness. Sure, Ryan. Whatever you say. You're the boss. The words carried no respect, only bitter compliance. Salvatore and his crew left, the restaurant door slamming behind them. In the silence that followed, Marco exhaled heavily. That's a problem, Marco said. He's testing you, and if you don't push back harder, he'll keep pushing until something breaks. I know, Ryan admitted. But if I come down on him too hard, I'll push him into outright rebellion. Right now he's frustrated. I need to keep him there. Unhappy but not actively working against me. For how long? Until I finish dealing with the other problem. Marco's eyes sharpened. What other problem? Ryan made a decision. Marco needed to know, if only to understand why Ryan's attention had been divided. Tommy's been stealing from us. Over $1 million across 18 months. The color drained from Marco's face. Tommy? Tommy Marchetti? Your cousin Tommy? The same. How? Why? His wife's medical bills, Ryan said. Cancer treatment. He was desperate, and he used his position to skim money through a shell vendor. One of our accountants discovered it. Marco processed this, his hands clenching into fists. Jesus, Ryan, you're sure? The evidence is solid. Completely solid. Bank records, security footage, incorporation documents with his signature. There's no mistake. When are you going to handle it? Soon. I'm waiting for the full picture, making sure he was working alone, understanding where all the money went. But soon. Marco's expression shifted through several emotions. Shock, anger, sorrow. Tommy had been part of the organization for 2 decades, had been at Marco's daughter's wedding, had been family in every sense that mattered. This is going to hurt morale, Marco said quietly. The younger guys, they look up to Tommy. When they find out he stole and got killed for it, some of them are going to wonder if loyalty means anything anymore. Loyalty means everything, Ryan said. That's exactly why this has to happen. If we let family steal and survive, we're saying the rules don't apply to us. And the moment the rules don't apply to us, they don't apply to anyone. I know. Damn it, Ryan. This is a mess. It gets worse, Ryan admitted. Salvatore's positioning himself as an alternative to my leadership. Tommy's betrayal is going to give him ammunition. He'll argue that I've lost control, that family connections don't matter anymore, that it's time for new blood to take over. You think he'll move against you? Not yet, but he's building toward it. Which means I need to resolve the Tommy situation quickly and decisively. Send a message that I'm still in control. They sat in silence for a moment, both men feeling the weight of decisions that had no good outcomes. Who's the accountant? Marco asked. The one who found the discrepancies? Elena Torres, junior accountant, been with us 8 months. Torres? Marco's brow furrowed. That name's familiar. Her father was Miguel Torres, used to work for the Latin Kings in the 90s, turned informant. Marco's expression hardened. And you trust her? She brought me evidence that's going to result in her co-worker's death, Ryan said. If she were working with law enforcement, this would be their play. Expose internal theft, create chaos, wait for us to implode. But she's not asking questions about the broader organization. She's not trying to access unrelated files. She's just following the money, exactly like I asked her to. And her analysis is brilliant. She sees patterns in the financial data that none of our other accountants even noticed. Still, Marco said cautiously, the daughter of an informant is not responsible for her father's choices, Ryan interrupted. I've had people watching her. She goes to work, visits her mother at the nursing home, goes home. No contact with law enforcement, no suspicious meetings. She's clean. You're gambling on her. I'm gambling on her talent, Ryan corrected. And so far it's paying off. She's given me information I needed, and she's keeping it quiet. That's worth something. Marco didn't look convinced, but he nodded. In their world, trust was always provisional, always subject to verification. Ryan understood Marco's skepticism. In his position, Ryan would feel the same. They left Salvatore's separately, Ryan climbing into the back of his town car where his driver Pete waited. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into Chicago's nighttime traffic. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Found the endpoint. Need to meet. Ryan typed back. Tomorrow. 7 a.m. Office. He pocketed the phone and stared out at the city passing by. Somewhere in the anonymous sprawl of buildings and streetlights, Tommy Marchetti was probably sitting down to dinner with his dying wife, completely unaware that his theft had been discovered and his execution was being planned. Somewhere else, Salvatore Grimaldi was plotting his next move, pushing boundaries, testing loyalties. And in her modest apartment in Logan Square, Elena Torres was finalizing the evidence that would set everything in motion. Ryan had built his empire on the principle that order required enforcement, that rules meant nothing without consequences. He'd believed it absolutely, until the moment those consequences required killing his own cousin for the crime of trying to save his wife's life. The mathematics of morality had no clean answers. The car turned onto West Monroe, approaching the office building. Ryan had work to do, calls to make, arrangements to prepare. But first, he'd pour himself a drink and sit in the darkness of his office, contemplating the intersection of loyalty and necessity, family and empire. His grandfather's photograph watched from the wall, that stern face that had overseen the organization's birth in the violent years after Prohibition. What would he think of Ryan's hesitation? Would he see it as weakness or wisdom? The old man had lived in simpler times. The mob had been unambiguously criminal, the violence more open, the choices clearer. Ryan operated in the gray spaces between legitimate business and necessary darkness, where every decision carried consequences that rippled outward in ways that were impossible to fully predict. Tomorrow, Elena would show him where Tommy's money had gone, the complete picture, as he'd requested. And then Ryan would have to make the decision he'd been delaying for 3 weeks. The car stopped. Ryan climbed out, entered his building, rode the elevator up. His office was exactly as he'd left it, dark except for the desk lamp, the city glowing through the windows. He poured bourbon, sat in his chair, and allowed himself to feel the weight of what was coming. In his world, there was no mercy for thieves, but there could be understanding. And maybe, in the space between the crime and the punishment, there could be a moment of clarity, a recognition that sometimes people broke not because they were evil, but because they were human and desperate and out of options. It didn't change what had to happen, but it changed how Ryan would remember Tommy afterward. The bourbon burned going down, warm and clean. Ryan raised the glass to the photographs, to his father and grandfather, and to Tommy Marchetti, cousin, friend, thief, dead man walking. Sorry, Tommy, he whispered to the empty office. I'm so goddamn sorry. But sorry wouldn't save him. Nothing would. Elena arrived at the office at 6:45, the winter darkness still heavy over Chicago. She carried a leather portfolio containing the final pieces of Tommy Marchetti's story, the complete money trail from initial theft to final destination, along with context that made the crime both understandable and unforgivable. Ryan's office light was already on. Elena knocked, entered, and found him standing at the window, coffee cup in hand, looking out at the city as it slowly woke. He turned when she entered, and Elena was struck by how exhausted he looked. The carefully maintained facade had cracked slightly, revealing the human underneath. Coffee? He offered, gesturing to the pot on his sidebar. No, thank you. Elena sat, placing the portfolio on the desk. I found everything. Ryan returned to his chair, setting down his cup with deliberate care. "Tell me." Elena opened the portfolio, organizing the documents in front of him. "The money from the Oak Park Credit Union gets wired to a cryptocurrency exchange called Gemini. Tommy converts it to Bitcoin, which he then transfers to a personal wallet. From there, he's been cashing out in small increments through a Bitcoin ATM network, usually $2,000 to $3,000 at a time, always at different locations around the Chicago area." "How much has he withdrawn in cash?" "Approximately $860,000 over the past 18 months. The remaining $480,000 is still in Bitcoin, held in a wallet I've traced to an account registered under Maria Marchetti's maiden name." Ryan studied the documents, his jaw tight. "And the cash? This is where it gets difficult," Elena said quietly. She pulled out a folder containing medical bills, payment receipts, and correspondence with Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Maria Marchetti's cancer treatment required experimental therapies not covered by insurance. The costs exceeded $1 million. Tommy's been paying in cash installments, usually $20,000 to $30,000 at a time. The hospital has records of every payment, all logged as cash transactions from Thomas or Maria Marchetti. Ryan leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. "He did it all for her." "Yes, and according to the correspondence I found in his emails, it worked. Maria's been in remission for 6 months. The treatment was successful." The irony was brutal. Tommy had stolen over $1 million, violated every rule of the organization, committed an unforgivable betrayal, and he'd saved his wife's life. If he'd done nothing, she'd be dead, and he'd still be trusted. Because he'd acted, she'd live, and he'd die. "There's more," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled out the final document, a handwritten letter Tommy had written but never sent, found in his desk drawer when she'd accessed his office after hours. "I think you should read this." Ryan took the letter. It was written on plain notebook paper, dated 2 weeks earlier. "Ryan, by the time you read this, you'll know what I did. There's no excuse that makes it right. I stole from family. I broke the most important rule. I know what that means. I want you to understand anyway. Maria's treatment wasn't covered. We sold everything. The house, the cars, my mother's jewelry. It wasn't enough. I asked the insurance company for exceptions. I begged the hospital for payment plans. Nothing worked. They said without the experimental treatment, she had 6 months. With it, maybe 50-50 odds. I couldn't let her die, Ryan. I couldn't sit there and watch her fade because I didn't have money. So I took it. I knew it was wrong every single time. I knew what would happen if I got caught. But 50-50 odds were better than certain death, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. Maria doesn't know where the money came from. She thinks I took out loans, borrowed from friends. When you do what you have to do, please don't tell her the truth. Let her think I died in an accident or something random. She's been through enough. I'm not asking for mercy. I know how this works. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not for saving my wife. I'd do that again. But for betraying you. For stealing from family. For being weak when I should have been strong enough to accept what I couldn't change. Tell my kids their father loved them." Tommy Ryan finished reading and set the letter down with trembling hands. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared at Tommy's handwriting as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. "He knows," Ryan said finally. "He knows I'll find out, and he's waiting for it." "I think he's been waiting since the beginning," Elena said. "Every time he moved money, every time he created a false transaction, he knew he was building his own execution. But he did it anyway because the alternative was watching Maria die." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gray. Below, early commuters hurried toward the L stations, wrapped in coats and scarves, lost in the rhythm of ordinary lives that didn't include these kinds of choices. "What would you do?" Ryan asked without turning. "If you were in my position?" Elena hadn't expected the question. She thought carefully before answering. "I don't know. In any normal business, you'd fire him, press charges, let the legal system handle it. But this isn't a normal business. Your authority depends on enforcing rules consistently. If you let Tommy live, everyone will know family connections can override betrayal. That undermines everything. But he didn't steal for greed. He stole for love. There's a difference, even if the outcome is the same." Ryan turned back to her, and his expression was raw. with an emotion Elena couldn't quite name. In my father's time, this would be simple. Tommy stole, Tommy dies. Clean, final, no ambiguity. But I've spent 20 years trying to build something more sophisticated than street rules and violence. I've tried to create an organization that operates with intelligence and planning, that solves problems without bodies turning up in the river. You've succeeded, Elena said. The Castellano organization is one of the most stable in Chicago specifically because you're not your father. And now that stability is being tested from multiple directions. Salvatore Grimaldi is positioning himself as an alternative to my leadership. He's arguing that I'm too soft, too focused on the old ways, not aggressive enough for the modern world. If I let Tommy live, Salvatore will use it as proof that I've lost my edge. He'll say I can't make hard decisions anymore, that family ties matter more than rules. And if you kill Tommy, then I prove I'm still in control. I send a message that no one is above the organization's laws, not even family. Salvatore loses his opening, and everyone remembers why I'm in charge. At the cost of killing a man who was trying to save his wife. Yes, they stood in the charged silence, both understanding that Ryan was articulating the decision aloud, testing how it sounded, seeing if there was any angle they hadn't considered. There's a third option, Elena said slowly, though I'm not sure you'll like it. Tell me. Fake Tommy's death. Make it look like you handled the situation according to the rules, but actually help him and Maria disappear. Witness protection, new identities. Relocated somewhere far from Chicago. Salvatore and the organization see that you enforce the law. Tommy and Maria get to live. Ryan considered this, his expression shifting through calculation. It's possible. We'd need a body, someone roughly Tommy's size, age. There are ways to make identification difficult. Burn damage, water decomposition. We'd need to fabricate evidence of the execution, photographs, maybe a location where people in the organization witnessed it. Could you pull it off? Maybe. But the risk is enormous. If anyone discovered the truth, if Salvatore or one of the other crews found out Tommy was alive, it wouldn't just undermine my authority. It would destroy it completely. I'd look weak and dishonest. Salvatore would have every soldier in Chicago questioning whether I could be trusted. So the question is whether saving Tommy's life is worth risking everything you've built. Yes. Elena watched Ryan wrestle with the choice, understanding that this was the moment that would define his leadership. Not the years of successful operations, not the careful expansion and legitimate business ventures. This single decision, made in a quiet office at dawn, would determine what kind of man Ryan Castellano actually was, beneath the suits and the strategies. I need to think, Ryan said finally. Thank you for the investigation. You've done exactly what I asked. Elena stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I don't think there's a right answer. Just different kinds of wrong. After she left, Ryan sat alone with the documents Elena had compiled, with Tommy's letter, with the weight of a decision that felt impossible. His phone buzzed. Marco, asking for an update. Ryan ignored it. He thought about his grandfather, who'd ruled through fear and violence, who'd ordered executions with the same ease as ordering dinner. The old man had died wealthy and powerful, surrounded by family who respected him, and enemies who feared him. Clean. Simple, effective. He thought about his father, who'd tried to balance the old ways with new sophistication, who'd taught Ryan that the mob survived by being invisible, by embedding itself so deeply in legitimate business that authorities couldn't untangle the threads. The strategy had worked. The Castellanos had thrived for decades. And he thought about Tommy, cousin, friend, soldier who'd broken every rule to save the woman he loved. Tommy, who'd accepted the consequences of his choices before even making them, who'd written a letter explaining the unforgivable, because he wanted someone to understand. Ryan opened his desk drawer and pulled out a pistol, a Glock 19 that he'd carried for years but rarely used. He checked the magazine, chambered a round, and set it on the desk in front of him. One bullet. One trigger pull. One end to Tommy's story that followed every precedent, every rule, every tradition of the life Ryan had inherited, or he could put the gun away, make calls, arrange logistics, fabricate a death that saved a life, risk everything he'd built on the belief that mercy mattered more than reputation. The sun rose fully over Chicago, light streaming through the windows and illuminating the office in warm gold tones. Ryan sat motionless, the gun and Tommy's letter side by side on the desk, two futures waiting for his choice. Outside, The organization continued its daily rhythm. Warehouses opening, trucks being loaded, collections being made, money flowing through the systems Ryan had built. Everything worked. Everything was stable. Everything depended on him making the choice that preserved order. But order for whom? And at what cost? Ryan's phone rang. Tommy Marchetti calling from the warehouse. Ryan stared at the name on the screen, his finger hovering over the answer button. This was the moment. Answer and summon Tommy to a meeting he wouldn't survive. Or let it ring. Buy more time. Delay the inevitable a little longer. Ryan answered. "Tommy," he said, his voice steady. "We need to talk. Come to the office at 10 o'clock. Come alone." "Sure, Ryan. Everything okay? We'll discuss it when you get here." Ryan ended the call and sat back, his decision made. In 4 hours, Tommy Marchetti would walk into this office, and one of two things would happen: a conversation that ended in violence, or a conversation that ended in mercy. Ryan still didn't know which. The gun remained on the desk, solid and certain. Tommy's letter lay beside it, paper and ink and desperate love. 2 paths, both leading to darkness of different kinds. Ryan closed his eyes and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, asking for wisdom or strength, or just the ability to live with whatever choice he made. The city hummed beyond the windows, indifferent and eternal, and somewhere a clock was counting down the hours until 10 a.m., when truth and consequence would finally converge. At 9:45, Ryan Castellano stood in his office, the Glock 19 now concealed in a shoulder holster beneath his suit jacket. He'd spent the past 4 hours making arrangements. Calls to Marco, instructions that could be enacted or canceled depending on how the next hour unfolded. His face was calm, professionally neutral, but his heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity he hadn't felt since the first time he'd pulled a trigger at 23. Elena sat in the corner chair, her presence unexpected but necessary. Ryan had asked her to be there as a witness, someone outside the traditional hierarchy who could verify what transpired. She looked pale but steady, her hands folded in her lap. "You don't have to stay," Ryan said. "What happens next? You don't need to see it." "Yes, I do," Elena replied quietly. "I started this. I should see how it ends." At precisely 10 o'clock, footsteps approached down the hallway. A knock, 3 raps, tentative. "Come in," Ryan called. Tommy Marchetti entered, and the change in him was immediately visible. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and shadowed. The confident operations director who'd run warehouses and construction sites with easy competence had been replaced by someone hollowed out by stress and anticipation. He saw Elena and frowned slightly, confused by her presence, then turned his attention fully to Ryan. "Close the door," Ryan said. Tommy complied, then stood in the center of the office, hands at his sides, waiting. His posture carried the resignation of a man who'd been expecting this moment for 18 months. "Sit," Ryan gestured to the chair across from his desk. Tommy sat. Up close, Ryan could see the tremor in his cousin's hands, the way his eyes kept darting to the desk drawer where weapons were sometimes kept. Tommy knew why he'd been summoned. He was just waiting for Ryan to say it. "Do you know why you're here?" Ryan asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Yes," Tommy said simply. "Tell me." Tommy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I stole from the organization. Over $1 million across 18 months. I used my access to create phantom vendors, manipulated expense records, moved money through shell companies. I did it to pay for Maria's cancer treatment." He paused, then added, "I know what happens now." Ryan leaned back, studying his cousin's face. "How long have you been waiting for this conversation?" "Since the day I made the first transfer. I knew eventually someone would notice. I knew the consequences. I accepted them before I started." "Did you?" Ryan's voice carried an edge. "Because accepting consequences means you're prepared for them. Are you prepared to die today, Tommy?" The bluntness of the question landed like a physical blow. Tommy's face went gray, but he nodded. "If that's what has to happen, yes. I want to make sure Maria and the kids are taken care of. Whatever money's left in the Bitcoin wallet, that's theirs. And I don't want them to know the truth. Let them think it was an accident or random violence. Don't make them live with knowing I was a thief." Ryan pulled out the folder Elena had compiled. All the evidence, all the transaction records, Tommy's own letter. He placed it on the desk between them. "Your letter," Ryan said, "where you explain everything. I read it." Tommy's eyes widened slightly, surprised. "I didn't mean for anyone to see that. It was just, I needed to write it down, to process what I'd done. It helped me understand, Ryan said. Not forgive, understand. There's a difference. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Tommy's voice was steady now, resigned. I knew the rules when I broke them. Family doesn't steal from family. There's no gray area, no extenuating circumstances. I betrayed you, betrayed the organization. I deserve whatever you decide. Ryan stood, walking to the window. The Chicago skyline stretched out before him, the city he'd grown up in, the territory he'd fought to control, the empire he'd built transaction by transaction, relationship by relationship. Somewhere in that vast sprawl of buildings and people, Maria Marchetti was probably sitting in their modest house, maybe looking at medical bills she thought were paid through loans, maybe thanking God her husband had found a way to save her life. She'd never know the cost. The organization runs on rules, Ryan said, not turning from the window. Loyalty, respect, omerta. Those aren't just words. They're the foundation that keeps us functional when the legal system considers us criminals. If people can't trust that the rules apply equally to everyone, the whole structure collapses. I know, Tommy said. So by that logic, you should die today. I should put a bullet in you, dispose of the body, send a message that no one, not family, not close associates, not 20-year veterans, is exempt from the consequences of betrayal. Tommy said nothing, just waited. Ryan turned back to face him. But there's another principle that matters in this life. Context. You didn't steal to buy cars or houses or to fund a gambling habit. You stole to save your wife. You acted out of love, not greed. Does that change the crime? No, but it changes how I see you. Ryan, Tommy started, but Ryan held up a hand. I'm not finished. For 3 weeks, I've been wrestling with this decision. Part of me, the part that sounds like my grandfather, says kill you and move on. That's how things have always worked. But another part, maybe the part that sounds like my father, says there should be room for mercy when the circumstances are extraordinary. Elena shifted in her corner chair, her eyes fixed on Ryan with an intensity that felt like witnessing something sacred and terrible simultaneously. The problem, Ryan continued, is that mercy makes me look weak. Salvatore Grimaldi and others are already questioning my leadership, arguing I'm too cautious, too focused on the old ways. If I let you live, they'll use it against me. They'll say I can't make hard decisions, that family loyalty matters more than organizational rules. They'll push harder, test me more, and eventually someone will move against me thinking I've gone soft. Then do what you have to do, Tommy said, his voice breaking slightly. I won't fight it. I won't run. Just please, take care of Maria and the kids. Ryan reached beneath his jacket and pulled out the Glock. Tommy flinched but didn't move, didn't try to stand or defend himself. He just closed his eyes, waiting. Ryan set the gun on the desk between them. Here's what's going to happen, he said quietly. You're going to die today. There will be evidence, photos, witnesses from Marco's crew, a body that gets discovered in a location that makes sense for this kind of thing. Your death will be confirmed, mourned, and used as an example that no one steals from the Castellano family. Tommy opened his eyes, confused. But it won't actually be you, Ryan continued. We'll stage it. Use someone else. There's a homeless man who died of an overdose last night, roughly your size and age. We'll burn the body, make identification difficult but not impossible. Your dental records will match closely enough that a cursory examination confirms it's you. Marco will handle the logistics. You're letting me live? Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. I'm letting you disappear, Ryan corrected. Tonight, you and Maria get on a plane to Phoenix. I have contacts there who owe me favors. They'll set you up with new identities, social security numbers, documentation. You'll become Thomas Miller, insurance salesman, with a wife who's recovering from cancer. You'll live a quiet, boring life far from Chicago. Ryan, Why? Because you're family, Ryan said simply. Because you did something terrible for an understandable reason. Because Maria's in remission and deserves to have her husband alive. And because I'm choosing to believe that mercy doesn't have to mean weakness. It can mean wisdom. Tears streamed down Tommy's face. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. This conversation never happened. As far as the organization knows, I killed you this morning for stealing. Marco will spread the word. People will be afraid. Respect will be maintained. And Salvatore's arguments about my weakness will evaporate. What about my kids? They'll be told their father died in a robbery gone wrong. It'll be hard, but eventually we'll arrange for them to reconnect with a distant relative named Thomas Miller who wants to help support them through the loss. They'll know the truth when they're old enough to keep it secret. Ryan pulled out a manila envelope from his desk drawer. Cash, $200,000. It's not the million you stole, but it's enough to start over. The rest of the Bitcoin wallet is yours. Use it carefully. Small amounts. Nothing that draws attention. Tommy took the envelope with shaking hands. I'll pay you back. However long it takes. You won't, Ryan interrupted. You're dead, remember? Dead men don't pay debts. Thomas Miller of Phoenix, insurance salesman, has no connection to Ryan Castellano or the Chicago organization. You understand? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Go, Ryan said, his voice rough with emotion. Marco's waiting downstairs. He'll take you to a safe house until tonight. Tell Maria you want a settlement on a lawsuit or something. Make up a story she'll believe. In 24 hours, you'll be in Arizona starting over. Tommy stood, moved toward the door, then turned back. Why did you really do it? The real reason? Ryan met his cousin's eyes. Because my father once told me that the difference between a boss and a tyrant is knowing when the rules serve justice and when they serve ego. I think he'd want me to choose mercy this time. And because, his voice cracked slightly, because I love you, Tommy. Despite everything, your family. Tommy nodded, unable to speak, and left the office. The door closed with a soft click that felt like the end of something. Elena remained in her chair, eyes wide. You just risked everything you built to save him. Yes. What if someone finds out? What if Salvatore discovers the truth? Then I'll deal with it. But I couldn't kill him, Elena. I couldn't look at Tommy and see only the theft. I saw the love that motivated it, the desperation, the impossible choice between breaking rules and watching someone die. And I realized that if I killed him for that, I'd be enforcing order at the expense of humanity. I'd be no better than the monsters we claim to be protecting people from. So mercy over authority. Mercy as a different kind of authority, Ryan corrected. The kind that says I'm strong enough to make exceptions when circumstances demand it, wise enough to see beyond rigid rules to the human beings affected by them. Maybe that makes me weak in Salvatore's eyes, but maybe it makes me the kind of leader this organization actually needs. Elena stood, gathering her things. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. I hope I did. I guess we'll find out. After Elena left, Ryan sat alone in his office, feeling the weight of his decision settle into his bones. In the hours that followed, Marco would stage Tommy's death, photograph the body, spread the news through the organization. People would be shocked, saddened, but ultimately convinced that Ryan Castellano still had the strength to enforce the most important rules. Only 4 people would know the truth: Ryan, Elena, Marco, and Tommy himself. It was enough. Ryan picked up the gun from his desk, ejected the magazine, and locked both in his desk drawer. He wouldn't need them today. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called the florist. I need an arrangement sent to the Marchetti residence, he said. White lilies. The card should read, with deepest sympathies for your loss. RC. The performance had to be convincing in every detail. Over the next week, Ryan attended Tommy's wake, standing before the closed casket that held a stranger's body, accepting condolences from soldiers and associates, delivering a eulogy about loyalty and consequences that made people whisper about his strength. Salvatore Grimaldi attended, watching with calculating eyes, but said nothing that challenged Ryan's authority. The message had been sent. The rules had been enforced. Order had been maintained. And in Phoenix, Thomas and Maria Miller settled into a small house with a desert view, far from the winter cold of Chicago and the life they'd left behind. 6 months after Tommy Marchetti's staged death, Ryan Castellano stood at the same office window where so many crucial decisions had been made, watching spring rain sweep across Chicago's skyline. The city had thawed from winter's grip, cherry blossoms blooming along the lakefront, the gray oppression of February giving way to May's tentative warmth. The organization had changed in subtle but significant ways. Elena Torres was no longer a junior accountant hidden in a cubicle. Ryan had promoted her to chief financial officer, a title that raised eyebrows among the traditional hierarchy, but proved itself through results. She'd restructured their financial systems, implementing integrated software that eliminated the gaps Tommy had exploited. More importantly, she'd identified 3 other potential vulnerabilities and addressed them before anyone could take advantage. The Castellano organization was now more secure, more efficient, and more profitable than at any point in its history. You wanted to see me? Elena's voice came from the doorway. She wore a charcoal pantsuit, her hair cut shorter now, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd proven her worth beyond question. Come in. Ryan gestured to the sitting area near the window. They'd long since moved past the formal desk interactions. How are the quarterly reports looking? Strong. Revenue up 12% over last quarter, expenses down 4% thanks to the new logistics contracts. The IRS audit came back clean. They found nothing worth pursuing. Good. Ryan poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handing one to Elena. I wanted to talk about something else. Salvatore Grimaldi. Elena's expression shifted to wariness. Salvatore remained a persistent problem, though his challenges to Ryan's authority had become more subtle in recent months. What about him? He's been moving into digital fraud operations. Exactly what I told him not to do. Small scale so far, but growing. He thinks I don't know because he's running it through crews outside Chicago, coordinating with people in Detroit and Milwaukee. How'd you find out? I have people watching him. Always have. Ryan sipped his bourbon. The question is what to do about it. He's openly defying my directives, but he's being careful not to create direct exposure for the main organization. If I move against him, I risk a civil war. If I don't, I look like I've lost control. Elena considered this. Third option, let him continue but document everything. When he inevitably gets caught or creates problems, you have evidence that you warned him, that he acted independently, that his failures are his own. Use his mistakes to marginalize him without direct confrontation. Ryan smiled. You're thinking like a boss now. I learned from watching you with Tommy. Sometimes the smart move isn't the obvious move. The mention of Tommy still carried weight. Everyone in the organization believed he'd been killed for theft, a cautionary tale told to new soldiers. Only Ryan, Elena, Marco, and the real Tommy knew the truth. And in Phoenix, Thomas Miller was thriving. He'd sent a single, carefully anonymous message 6 weeks after relocating. A postcard with a desert sunset. No words, just a small notation on the back that looked like random numbers but decoded to, "Thank you." Speaking of Tommy, Ryan said carefully, have you had any second thoughts about what we did? Elena shook her head. No, you chose mercy over rigid enforcement, and no one's questioned your authority because of it. If anything, the story of how you handled a family member's betrayal made people more careful, not less. They saw that even your closest blood wasn't exempt from consequences, because they think he's dead. Yes, which means the mercy was real but invisible. You saved Tommy without appearing weak. She paused, searching for the right word. That's sophisticated leadership, or elaborate deception. Same thing, in this business. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain. The office felt different now, less like a fortress, more like a space where complicated decisions got made by imperfect people doing their best. Ryan had learned that leadership wasn't about always being the hardest, the most ruthless, the most uncompromising. Sometimes it meant being smart enough to bend the rules without breaking them, to find solutions that preserved both authority and humanity. I have something for you, Ryan said, pulling an envelope from his inside pocket. Your performance bonus for the year, plus a little extra for everything you did with the Tommy situation. Elena opened the envelope, her eyes widening at the check amount. Ryan, this is more than my annual salary. You earned it. You saved the organization from a major vulnerability, restructured our financial systems, and kept a secret that could have destroyed everything if it got out. That's worth compensation. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay. I'm building something here, Elena. Not just a criminal organization hiding behind legitimate businesses, but something more sophisticated. A structure that can operate in the modern world, that understands technology and finance and the changing nature of power. I need people who can think beyond the old rules, who can adapt. You're one of those people. Elena met his eyes, and Ryan saw the decision forming. She'd been offered an exit. The bonus was enough that she could walk away, start over somewhere else, leave this world behind. But she wasn't going to take it. I'll stay, she said, but I want something in return. Name it. A voice in strategic decisions. Not just financial oversight, but actual input on direction, operations, how we evolve. You said you're building something new. I want to help shape it. Ryan extended his hand. Deal. They shook, the gesture sealing a partnership that had been forged in the pressure of impossible choices and emerged stronger. Over the following months, Ryan implemented changes that would have been unthinkable to his grandfather. He reduced the organization's involvement in street-level operations, protection rackets, loan sharking, the visible crimes that attracted police attention. Instead, he expanded into consulting, using the organization's expertise in logistics and labor management to offer legitimate services to businesses that didn't ask too many questions about their consultants' backgrounds. Money laundering became investment management. Enforcement became security consulting. The boundary between legal and illegal grew increasingly blurred until even federal investigators struggled to identify specific crimes. Elena was instrumental in this transition, her financial genius creating structures so complex that tracing money from source to destination required expertise most law enforcement agencies didn't possess. She also insisted on limits: no human trafficking, no exploitation of children, no unnecessary violence. Ryan agreed, recognizing that some lines needed to remain bright even in the gray world they inhabited. Salvatore Grimaldi's digital fraud operation eventually collapsed when one of his Detroit partners got arrested and immediately cooperated with federal authorities. Salvatore lost money, credibility, and 3 of his best soldiers to lengthy prison sentences. Ryan offered no bailouts, no rescue. He simply let Salvatore's failure speak for itself. Within a year, Salvatore's power had evaporated, and he was reduced to running a small crew that handled parking lot collections at concerts. The warning had been delivered without Ryan needing to fire a shot. On a warm evening in October, nearly a year after Tommy's staged death, Ryan received a call from an unknown Phoenix number. He answered cautiously. "Ryan, it's Tommy." The voice was familiar but changed, lighter, less burdened. "You shouldn't be calling. I know, I needed to tell you something. Maria and I are going to have another child. We found out yesterday. After everything with the cancer, the doctor said it was unlikely, but it happened anyway. A gift." Ryan closed his eyes, emotion tightening his throat. "Congratulations, Tommy. That's wonderful. I wouldn't be here to see it if not for you. My kids wouldn't have their father. Maria wouldn't have her husband. You gave us a second chance at everything. You saved Maria first. I just made sure you both got to enjoy it. Still, I think about what you risked for me, the choice you made. I know I can never repay it, but I want you to know it mattered. We're happy, Ryan. Really happy. And every day I wake up grateful that you chose mercy. Live well, Tommy. That's all the repayment I need." They spoke for a few more minutes, carefully vague about details, nothing that could compromise either of them if the line was monitored. When Ryan hung up, he poured himself a drink and walked to the window. Chicago sparkled in the autumn dusk, lights coming on across the skyline like stars. Somewhere in that vast city, people were making impossible choices, balancing love and duty, trying to navigate the space between who they were and who they needed to be. Ryan had made his choice. He'd picked mercy over tradition, wisdom over rigidity, the future over the past, and the organization hadn't collapsed. If anything, it had grown stronger, more resilient, more capable of surviving in a world that was constantly changing. His grandfather's photograph still watched from the wall, but Ryan no longer felt its judgment as condemnation. The old man had built an empire in his time, using the tools and rules that made sense for that era. Ryan was building a different empire, one that recognized that true power came not from fear alone, but from the sophisticated understanding of when to enforce rules and when to transcend them. The intercom buzzed. "Marco," asking about the next day's meetings. Ryan responded, then returned to his desk, to the endless work of maintaining an organization that existed in the shadows between legitimate and criminal, past and future, judgment and mercy. Outside, the rain began again, that familiar Chicago rain that had been falling the night Elena first brought him evidence of Tommy's theft. Rain that washed the city clean, that carried secrets into the sewers and out to the lake, that promised renewal and endings in equal measure. Ryan raised his glass to the window, to the ghosts of his father and grandfather, to Tommy thriving in Phoenix, to Elena working late in her office down the hall, to all the people caught in the machinery of his world and trying to find their way through. "Here's to choices," he whispered to the empty office, "and to living with them." The rain drummed its answer, steady and eternal, washing the city clean while new secrets took root in the spaces between truth and necessary lies. And in the morning, The empire would wake again, changed but enduring, built on foundation of rules flexible enough to bend for love without breaking for weakness. That was Ryan Castellano's legacy. Not the money or territory, but the truth he'd confirmed and the silence it had earned. That mercy and strength weren't opposites, just different expressions of the same wisdom. The truth that had silenced the mob wasn't that a boss could be ruthless. It was that he could be ruthless and kind, traditional and innovative, powerful enough to kill and wise enough to choose not to. That was the truth Elena had helped him see. The truth Tommy had survived. The truth that would define the Castellano organization for generations to come. And as the rain fell and the city slept, Ryan Castellano closed his office, went home to his empty house, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd chosen correctly. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new choices, new tests of his leadership, but tonight, he could rest knowing that when the hardest decision came, he'd chosen the path that let him sleep. That was worth more than all the power in Chicago. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel to hear more stories like this one. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Ryan's decision and what you would have done in his position. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you compelling narratives that explore the complexity of human choices in extraordinary circumstances.